What happens when a fairy tale wedding turns into a battlefield? Picture this: a magnificent Hamptons estate. A billionaire, groom on the verge of securing his dynasty, and a beautiful bride from one of New York's most powerful families. The scene is perfect, a meticulously crafted illusion of happiness. But an illusion is all it is. In a moment that will go down in society legend. The cathedral doors swing open, revealing a second woman, also in a wedding dress. She is the ghost of his past, an ex-girlfriend he brutally discarded and legally banned from this very event. She isn't here to object. She's here to detonate a secret that will prove that the groom's entire empire is built on a devastating lie. Stay with me as we unravel the story of Julian Croft and the day his carefully constructed world came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. The late June sun was a paid actor. It streamed through the stained glass windows of the St. Ignatius Chapel in the Hamptons, bathing the assembled guests in a holy golden light that felt both sanctifying and fantastically expensive. Every detail of the wedding of Julian Croft to Charlotte Van Doren had been curated with the precision of a military campaign. The flowers alone cascading waterfalls of peonies and Dutch hydrangeas cost more than the average American's annual salary. The guest list was a constellation of East Coast power, old money scions, tech titans, senators, and the kind of tastemakers whose approval could mint a brand overnight. Julian Croft stood at the altar, a man sculpted by ambition. His Tom Ford tuxedo was flawless, his posture impeccable. But a thin sheen of sweat glistened on his brow, a lone crack in the marble facade. He was 34 years old and on the precipice of achieving everything he had ever wanted. Croft Innovations, his AI logistics company, had made him a billionaire. Today, marrying Charlotte, he wasn't just gaining a wife, he was acquiring a legacy. The Van Dorens were old New York, their name etched onto museum wings and university libraries. They were the one thing his new money couldn't buy pedigree. His best man and younger brother Damien adjusted Julian's bow tie with a nervous energy that mirrored his own. "Breathe, man." Damien whispered, his voice a low rumble. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad, not your bride." Julian forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just want everything to be perfect. But it wasn't perfection he was worried about. It was imperfection. Specifically, one very particular 5'7" imperfection, named Ava Reynolds. 2 weeks ago, he had sat in a sterile conference room with his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Gavriel. She is not to get within a 5-mile radius of the venue. Julian had set his voice as cold and hard as polished steel. He'd slid a photograph across the table. It was a candid shot of Ava laughing, her head thrown back, her brown hair catching the light. It was taken during a time he had worked very hard to forget. Her name is Ava Reynolds. She may try to use an alias. She may try to come as a guest of a guest. I don't care if she's disguised as a nun. You stop her. Am I clear? Crystal. Gavriel had replied, not even glancing at the photo. Consider her a non-entity. But Ava had never felt like a non-entity. She felt like a phantom limb, an ache that returned in the dead of night. She was the ghost of Orchard Street, the 2-bedroom walk-up where they had built his empire on a second-hand laptop and takeout containers of cheap noodles. She was the inconvenient truth he had tried to bury under a mountain of cash and a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to stop a bullet. His gaze flickered towards the front pew where his future mother-in-law, Victoria Van Doren sat like a reigning monarch. Her silver dress was understated and bespoke her posture and advertisement for generations of inherited superiority. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her daughter's, met his for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a look of welcome, but of assessment. She was the gatekeeper, and he knew with chilling certainty that his acceptance was conditional. Victoria didn't approve of him. She approved of his balance sheet. The Van Doren fortune, while respectable, had dwindled. They needed a capital infusion, and Julian was it provided he was as advertised, brilliant, successful, and above all, clean. No scandals, no skeletons. The string quartet, tucked away in a loft, swelled into the opening notes of Wagner's bridal chorus. The low hum of chatter among the guests died instantly. A collective sigh of anticipation rippled through the chapel. The massive oak doors at the back of the aisle swung open. And there she was. Charlotte. She was breathtaking, a vision in custom. Vera Wang, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon from which a diamond-encrusted veil cascaded down her back. Her father, a portly man with a kind but worried face, had her arm tucked in his. As she began her slow, regal procession down the aisle, a genuine smile finally broke across Julian's face. He saw his future walking towards him. The summer home in Nantucket, the penthouse on Park Avenue, the children with their mother's eyes and his ambition. The cover of Forbes, the whispers of respect when he entered a room. Everything he had clawed his way up from poverty to attain. He looked at Charlotte, and for that single fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe the story he had told everyone, including himself. The anxiety receded, replaced by a wave of triumph. He was safe. The ghost had been exorcised. The gilded cage was finally his. Ava Reynolds did not look like a ghost. Ghosts are ethereal, translucent. In the back of a black SUV parked a block away from St. Ignatius, she looked painfully, terrifyingly solid. The wedding dress she wore was not a grand confection like Charlotte's would be. It was a simple, elegant sheath of ivory silk she'd bought at a vintage store years ago, back when a future with Julian had seemed not only possible, but inevitable. It was the dress she would have worn. Putting it on this morning had felt like an act of both sacred remembrance and profound sacrilege. Her best friend Ben Carter sat beside her, his hand gripping hers. His knuckles were white. "Last chance to back out, Ava," he said, his voice gentle. "We can drive to Montauk, get drunk on the beach, and throw rocks at the ocean. No one would blame you." Ava shook her head, her gaze fixed on the chapel spire visible over the treetops. "If I back out now, he wins. He erases me completely." Her mind drifted back, not to the ugly end, but to the brilliant beginning. They had met at a dingy tech incubator in a shared workspace in downtown Manhattan. He was the charismatic visionary with a head full of disruptive ideas. She was the quiet, brilliant coder who saw the structural flaws in his grand designs and knew instinctively how to fix them. They were fat and gasoline. For 3 years, their lives had been a blur of caffeine code and a love so intense it felt like it could power the city. Their apartment on Orchard Street was their entire world. The office was a corner of the living room, where 2 desks were pushed together, their monitors practically touching. Croft Innovations wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born over greasy pizza at 3 a.m., its foundational algorithms written by Ava on a whiteboard, while Julian paced and dreamed out loud. The name itself had been her idea. "It's your name," she'd said. "You're the face. I'm happy to be the engine." That was her mistake. She trusted him. She believed that their love was the only contract they needed. The shift was gradual, then brutally swift. The first round of venture capital changed him. He traded his worn jeans for tailored suits. He started talking about optics and personal branding. He moved their offices to a sleek, impersonal space in the financial district, and suddenly the engine was hidden away in the basement. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. He came back to the Orchard Street apartment, which he hadn't slept in for weeks, and told her it was over. He was clinical detached, like a surgeon removing a tumor. "I'm moving in a different direction," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. "Personally and professionally." "What does that mean?" She'd asked, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "It means the company needs a different kind of public face. We're courting a different class of investor. You and we're not the right story anymore." The right story turned out to be Charlotte Van Doren, whom he'd met at a charity gala 2 months prior. The betrayal of his heart was devastating, but the betrayal of their work was a deeper wound. 2 days after he left, a check arrived via courier for $1 million. With it was the NDA. It was a document of total erasure. It stipulated that she could never claim to have worked for, contributed to, or been a part of Croft Innovations in any capacity. It stated that if she ever spoke of their personal or professional relationship, he would not only sue her for the $1 million back, but would countersue for damages to the company's reputation to the tune of $50 million. It was a gag order, a threat, and an insult all in one. He was buying her history, their history, for a fraction of what it was worth. She never cashed the check. For a year, she was paralyzed by the injustice. She watched from the sidelines as he was hailed as a lone genius, the next Steve Jobs. Every article that praised his innate coding talent felt like a knife twisting in her gut. He had stolen her work, her future, and her past. The wedding announcement was the final catalyst. Seeing his smug, triumphant face next to the perfect society princess lit a fire in her. This wasn't just his wedding. It was his coronation, a celebration of the very lie that had destroyed her. And she decided with a clarity that felt like destiny that she would not allow it to happen. "It's not about winning him back, Ben," she said, her voice low and steady, as she finally turned from the window. "I wouldn't take him back if he were the last man on earth. It's about truth. He gets to stand in that white church and be celebrated as a self-made man. I'm here to remind him and everyone else that he wasn't self-made. He was made by me, and I'm the bill that's finally coming due." Ben squeezed her hand one last time. "Okay, then let's go raise some hell." He got out and opened her door. As Ava stepped out of the SUV, the ivory silk of her dress pooling for a moment on the asphalt, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a reckoning, and she was about to walk into her own wedding. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with ceremonial reverence. The minister, a man with a soothing, practiced cadence, was speaking of unions, partnerships, and the sacred journey of 2 souls. Julian stood facing Charlotte, holding her delicate hands in his. He was so close. The words "I do" were forming on his lips. He gazed into Charlotte's blue eyes, a perfect reflection of the future he'd designed. "And do you, Julian Croft, take Charlotte Van Doren to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or for poorer, as long as you both shall live?" Julian drew a breath. This was it, the final seal on his new life. Boom. The sound was not loud, but it was definitive. It was the sound of the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel being pushed open with force, swinging inward until they banged against the stone walls. Every head in the room swiveled in unison. The string quartet faltered, a single violin screeching into the sudden cavernous silence. And there, framed in the archway, like a spectre at the feast, stood Ava Reynolds. She was a column of pure white against the darkness of the vestibule. Her simple dress, her unbound hair, her lack of a veil. It was a statement of raw, unadorned presence. She wasn't an imitation of the bride at the altar. She was an alternative, a question made flesh. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was a sound of shock, of confusion, and for a few in the know of delicious, unadulterated scandal. Phones previously tucked away emerged as if by magic. The professional photographers, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly, their flashes beginning to strobe like frantic heartbeats, capturing the tableau that would be on the cover of every tabloid. By morning, the groom frozen in horror, the bride, her perfect smile collapsing into a mask of disbelief, and the woman at the door, the other bride. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. It was a nightmare, a living, breathing, silk-clad nightmare. Gabriel had failed. The 5-mile radius, the disguises, the threats, it had all been for nothing. She was here. Charlotte's hands went cold in his. Her head turned slowly from Ava back to him, her eyes wide with a dawning, humiliating horror. Julian, she whispered the name, a fragile question mark. Who is that? But Julian didn't answer. His entire focus was on Ava, who had taken a single deliberate step into the chapel. His shock was rapidly curdling into a white-hot rage. How dare she? How dare she try to ruin this, the most important day of his life? Victoria Van Doren's reaction was faster. With a barely perceptible flick of her wrist, she signaled to the 2 broad-shouldered men in dark suits who had been standing discreetly against the wall. They were her personal security, and they began moving towards Ava instantly, their steps silent and predatory. They were halfway down the aisle when Ava's voice rang out clear and steady, without a trace of hysteria. It cut through the shocked whispers like a shard of glass. Stop! To everyone's astonishment, the security men actually paused. Her command was absolute. She took another step forward. Her eyes were not on the guards or the stunned guests, or even on Charlotte. They were locked on Julian. It was a gaze that held 3 years of shared history, of love and betrayal and simmering injustice. Before you have me thrown out, Julian, she said, her voice resonating in the chapel's perfect acoustics. Perhaps you should explain to your bride and to her family what this is. Her hand came up, and in it she held a single folded document. It was a simple piece of paper, but she held it like a weapon, or a shield. The security guards looked from her to Julian, then to Victoria, awaiting confirmation to proceed. The entire room held its breath. The minister stood with his mouth agape, his prepared words about love and fidelity dissolving into irrelevance. Julian stared at the paper in her hand, and a new, colder fear washed over him, extinguishing the fire of his rage. He didn't know for certain what it was, but he had a sick, sinking feeling. An NDA could be explained away. A lover's quarrel could be dismissed as drama. But a document was proof. What is this spectacle? Victoria Van Doren's voice was low and lethal as she rose from her seat. Remove her, now. But Ava didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes on Julian, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. Go on, Julian. Tell them. Tell them all who I am. The challenge hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was trapped. In front of him stood the perfect future. Behind him stood the undeniable truth. And he knew in that gut-wrenching moment that he could no longer have both. The document in Ava's hand trembled, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. Yet to Julian it seemed to shake the very foundations of the chapel. The world narrowed to that single piece of paper. The scent of the peonies was suddenly cloying, suffocating. The holy light from the stained glass windows felt like an interrogation lamp. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and forward planning, became a frantic cyclone of disastrous outcomes. He saw the gleeful headlines, the plunging stock ticker, the smirks on the faces of his rivals. He saw the Van Doren name, his golden ticket, turning to ash. He had to regain control. He opened his mouth, prepared to unleash a torrent of dismissive lies, to paint her as an obsessed, hysterical stalker. But the words that came out were a pathetic squeak. "It's nothing." He managed his voice, a hoarse croak that betrayed his panic. He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that was supposed to look casual, but was jerky and unconvincing. He turned to Charlotte, forcing his face into a mask of pained sincerity. "Darling, I am so deeply sorry. She's a disgruntled ex. This is a pathetic, desperate stunt for money. Let's just have her removed so we can continue our day." Charlotte, however, was no longer looking at him. Her brief, wounded fawn expression had vanished, replaced by the chillingly focused calm of a predator assessing a threat. The Van Doren instinct for survival, honed over generations of navigating social and financial minefields, was now fully engaged. This was no longer just a romantic humiliation. It had the distinct metallic scent of a business complication. "What is the document, Miss Reynolds?" Charlotte asked. Her voice, unlike Julian's, was perfectly steady, cutting through the chapel's tense silence. She didn't look at Julian for permission. She had taken command. Ava's eyes flickered from Julian to Charlotte, and for a fleeting moment, a glimmer of something unreadable pity perhaps, or a strange sort of female solidarity passed between them. Then it was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "Why don't you ask your fiancé?" she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "He should recognize it. It's the original Articles of Incorporation for Croft Innovations." She let the words hang in the air for a pregnant, devastating beat, her gaze sweeping over the front pews before landing back on Julian. She delivered the final killing blow. "The company he founded. With me." A tidal wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the pews. Co-founder. The word was a poison dart. Julian saw it strike Marcus Thorne, the hedge fund titan whose eyes narrowed in instant cold calculation. He saw it hit Victoria Van Doren like a physical blow, her regal posture stiffening as the full implication, the one catastrophic possibility her team of lawyers and investigators had missed, slammed into her. This wasn't just a skeleton in the closet. This was a structural flaw in the foundation of the entire deal. "That's a lie!" Julian shouted, his voice finally finding its volume, but cracking with desperation. "A pathetic, baseless lie. Her name is on nothing. She signed an NDA. The mention of the NDA, meant to be a show of force, was a catastrophic mistake. It was an admission that there was something to be silenced, something worth paying for." Victoria's eyes flashed with fury at his stupidity, and then the second, more intimate and far more lethal betrayal of the day. "She's not lying, Julian." The voice was quiet, heavy with a sorrow that made it all the more damning. It came from beside him. It was Damien, his own brother, his best man. Julian whipped his head around, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. But Damien refused to meet his gaze. Instead, his younger brother looked out at the stunned crowd, his face a miserable portrait of guilt and resolve. "I was there," Damien said, his voice gaining strength as he unburdened his conscience. "I was a notary back then, trying to make extra money. I notarized the original partnership agreement in their apartment on Orchard Street. Before the venture capital funding, before the lawyers got involved, before you pushed her out and rewrote the history." He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, glistening with tears, found Ava at the back of the chapel. "We all know Ava built this company with you." If Ava's entrance was a bomb, Damien's confession was the dirty radioactive fallout that contaminated everything. Julian stared at his brother, the world tilting on its axis. The betrayal was so absolute, so inconceivable that for a moment he couldn't even feel rage, only a dizzying sense of disbelief. His own blood. The scene finally shattered its fragile container of social decorum and descended into open chaos. The photographers, sensing the story of a lifetime, surged forward like a single organism, their flashes strobing relentlessly. Guests were on their feet, not just whispering, but talking openly, their voices a rising tide of scandalized chatter. The minister, looking utterly lost, had backed away from the altar as if it were cursed. But the real explosion, the one that would level Julian completely, was yet to come. It came not from the ghost at the door, nor the traitor at his side, but from the bride. Charlotte grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into the fine wool of his tuxedo like talons. She yanked him violently to the side behind a large marble pillar, creating a tiny private pocket in the public maelstrom. Her face, moments before a mask of pale shock, was now transformed into a canvas of cold reptilian fury. "You idiot!" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was more terrifying than any shout he had ever heard. "You breathtaking, incompetent, utter idiot!" Julian was reeling his mind, unable to process the speed of his own destruction. "Charlotte, listen to me. I can fix this. I can fix this." She let out a short, incredulous, mirthless laugh. "Fix this with what more lies? More sloppy, half-baked cover-ups?" She leaned in closer, her breath hot against his cheek, her blue eyes like chips of ice. "Did you really think we were that stupid? That my family, the Van Dorens, wouldn't do a background check so deep it would make the CIA blush? We have a whole firm on retainer for this, for vetting new money liabilities, exactly like you." Her words were rapid-fire bullets. "We knew about Ava Reynolds. We knew she was the Orchard Street project. We wrote her off as a manageable risk, a bitter college girlfriend you paid off with $1 million. Pathetic but contained. My mother sat you down in the library 3 weeks ago. She looked you in the eye and asked, 'Julian, are there any other documents? Any other inconvenient partnerships from your past that might emerge?' And you smiled that smug smile of yours, and you lied directly to her face. You didn't just lie to your bride, you fool. You lied to Victoria Van Doren. You have absolutely no comprehension of the catastrophic mistake you have just made." Julian felt a cold dread, slick and oily, creep up his spine. This wasn't the wounded cry of a heartbroken lover. This was the furious post-mortem of a CEO whose merger has just spectacularly imploded due to undisclosed liabilities. "I don't understand," he stammered, the words feeling thick and stupid in his mouth. "Of course you don't," she sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "You never did. You were so busy buying your way into our world, you never bothered to understand how it actually works. You saw us as a prize, a name, a beautiful backdrop for your pathetic Horatio Alger story. You never once stopped to ask why. Why we were so eager to welcome a tech billionaire with no family, no history, no pedigree into the fold. She delivered the truth with the brutal efficiency of a guillotine. "My family is broke, Julian," she said, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of glass. "Not poor darling, never that, but broke, leveraged to the hilt on bad real estate deals and my father's disastrous belief in oil futures. One more bad quarter, one more creditor calling in a note, and the whole house of cards comes down. We didn't need your love. We didn't need your charisma. We needed your company. We needed Croft Innovations, a clean, scandal-free, cash-positive asset with a meteoric stock price. It was our life raft." She gestured vaguely towards the chaos in the chapel. "And you, with your secret co-founder and your notarized partnership agreements, have just riddled that life raft with holes. A foundational legal claim to the intellectual property. A public scandal that will send the stock into the toilet before the markets even open on Monday. You haven't just embarrassed me. You have financially ruined us." She took a step back, her assessment complete. Her eyes raked over him one last time with a look of such profound contempt it physically hurt him. "You're not a visionary. You're not a genius. You're a bad investment. You are in every sense of the word completely and utterly worthless." The word hung in the air between them. Worthless. The primal fear he had spent his entire life running from the label he thought his billions had made him immune to was now his final official designation. He looked from Charlotte's face contorted with a rage born of financial desperation to her mother Victoria, who was now standing with her lawyer, her expression not one of anger, but of cool, pragmatic damage control. He looked past them to Ava standing quietly at the back of the chapel, her expression not triumphant, but somber, watching the collapse of the world they had once built together. And in that horrifying, crystallizing moment, Julian Croft finally understood. He wasn't the predator in this gilded jungle. He wasn't the clever hunter who had trapped the perfect prize. He was the prey. He was the golden goose they had lured into their pen, and he had just confessed to his buyers that his eggs were made of lead. He had been played outmaneuvered and utterly, totally vanquished. Charlotte's final hissed word, worthless, was the gunshot that started the race. A race for everyone to distance themselves from Julian Croft as quickly and publicly as possible. The victor by a landslide was Victoria Van Doren. With the calculated poise of a CEO announcing a hostile takeover, she rose from her pew and glided to the front of the chapel. She didn't hurry. Her movements were deliberate, designed to draw every eye. She ignored the minister, who now looked like a bewildered bystander at a multi-car pile-up, and positioned herself at the center of the altar, reclaiming the stage. The murmuring chaos subsided as she prepared to speak. Her voice, when it came, was not raised, but it carried the chilling authority of old money and absolute power. "To our esteemed friends, our family, our honored guests," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembled titans of industry and society mavens. She subtly acknowledged Marcus Thorne, the powerful hedge fund manager in the third row, whose fund held a significant stake in Croft Innovations. "You have borne witness today to a most unfortunate and disillusioning event." She paused, letting the drama hang in the air. "The Van Doren family entered into this proposed union in good faith. We believed Mr. Croft to be a man of vision, yes, but also a man of integrity. We believed his narrative of singular, self-made success. It has become painfully, publicly clear that this narrative is a fiction, a deception. She turned her head slowly, her ice-blue eyes pinning Julian to the spot. We have been presented today with evidence corroborated by Mr. Croft's own brother that his success was not his alone. That the very foundation of his company, the value upon which this union was predicated, is built upon a lie of omission, and it would seem the blatant theft of intellectual property. A fresh wave of gasps and frantic whispers rippled through the pews. Victoria had just handed every investor, every journalist, the exact legal terminology they needed. She had weaponized the scandal for them. "This union," she announced, her voice dropping to a lethally calm register, "is hereby terminated. The Van Doren family will not under any circumstances be proceeding with this marriage." She held up a hand to silence the burst of camera flashes. "Furthermore, let me be unequivocal. We will be filing a lawsuit against Mr. Croft for fraudulent misrepresentation and breach of the nuptial contract. We entered into this arrangement under the assumption of his sole ownership of a company whose valuation is now a matter of serious legal jeopardy. He has not only humiliated my daughter and betrayed our trust, he has attempted to defraud my family. We will see him in court, and we will pursue this matter to the fullest extent of the law." It was a public execution, delivered with the serene smile of a surgeon. In 2 minutes, she had completely rewritten the narrative. The Van Dorens were no longer desperate socialites clinging to a tech billionaire. They were the shrewd, aggrieved victims of a contemptible fraud. She had insulated her family and delivered Julian's head on a silver platter. With a final withering look that communicated utter revulsion, she turned, took Charlotte's arm, and began her regal, unhurried retreat down the aisle. Charlotte, for her part, played the role of the shattered bride beautifully. Her head bowed her Vera Wang veil, now a shroud of tragic dignity. Their departure broke the spell. The social fabric of the room tore apart. The guests, understanding the verdict had been delivered, began a mass exodus. It wasn't a panicked rush. It was a controlled, almost chilling stampede of the elite. No one made eye contact with Julian. He was radioactive, a social leper. A senator he'd golfed with last month hurried past, suddenly fascinated by his shoes. The wife of a tech CEO, who had gushed about his genius at a dinner party, literally turned her back as he looked her way, creating a physical wall of silk and disdain. The exodus was a sea of averted gazes and frantic whispers, 1,000 tiny knives of social shunning. He was left standing alone at an altar, built for a future that had just been firebombed. The opulent arrangements of peonies and hydrangeas, once symbols of his triumphant arrival, now seemed like funeral wreaths on the grave of his ambition. The only person who approached him was Damien. His brother's face was a wreck of conflicting emotions: guilt, fear, and a stubborn sliver of righteousness. "Julian, I had to." Damien started, his voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't let you. You've how?" Julian snarled, spinning to face him. The word was low, guttural, packed with a lifetime of fraternal rivalry, now curdled into pure hatred. "You sanctimonious little worm. You stood there, my best man, and you gutted me." "It was the truth," Damien shot back, finding a sliver of courage. Don't you remember? Don't you remember those nights on Orchard Street when you were sick with the flu and she stayed up for 48 hours straight, rewriting that entire algorithm from scratch because you said it wasn't elegant enough? Do you remember her crying when you finally got that first seed money? Not because of the money, but because she said, "We did it, Jules. We really did it." The memory so long suppressed lanced through Julian's fury. He did remember. He remembered the smell of cheap coffee and her hair as she fell asleep on his shoulder, the keyboard still warm. The memory made his betrayal feel even viler, and his rage surged to cover the shame. "You think you're a hero?" Julian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You just destroyed your own family for a woman who hasn't been part of our lives for years. You are dead to me. Do you understand? Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret." Damien flinched as if struck. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a grey, hollow look of defeat. He opened his mouth to say something more, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked away, not down the main aisle, but through a small side door, disappearing like a coward. Julian was now truly alone. Except for her. He turned his gaze to the back of the chapel. Ava hadn't moved. The chaos had swirled around her, but she had remained a fixed point of stillness, the calm eye of the hurricane she had created. The document was a crumpled mess in her hand. Her shoulders were no longer squared with righteous fury. They were slumped with the profound, soul-deep exhaustion of a soldier who has won a war only to find the battlefield silent and empty. There was no look of triumph on her face, no gloating smirk. There was only a vast, hollow sadness. He felt an insane urge to rage at her, to blame her for all of this. He took a step down the aisle toward her. "Are you happy now?" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You got what you wanted. You ruined me." Ava finally looked at him, and her gaze traveled over the opulent, empty room, the wilting flowers, the abandoned programs littering the pews. Her eyes, when they met his, were filled not with hatred, but with a weary, devastating pity. "Look at all this, Julian," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the stillness. "Look at this grotesque theater you built. Did you really think this was winning?" She shook her head slowly. "Nobody won here today. I just came to collect on a debt. The bill is paid. That's all." She let the crumpled document fall from her fingers. It fluttered to the stone floor, a forgotten casualty of the war. With that, she turned. For a moment, Julian thought she might say something else, offer one last word of damnation or farewell. But she didn't. She simply walked out of the massive oak doors and into the sunlight. Her simple white dress, a stark final rebuke to the Vera Wang-clad lie he had tried to build. She didn't look back. The moment she was gone, the silence was broken by a roar. The paparazzi held at bay until now surged past the overwhelmed security, their cameras flashing like a violent electrical storm. The noise was deafening, the questions shouted and incoherent. Julian felt a hand on his arm. It was Gavriel, his face grim. "Sir, we have to go. Now." Julian allowed himself to be pulled away, stumbling like a drunk. The flashes were blinding, each one feeling like a physical blow. He wasn't the brilliant tech mogul. He wasn't the society groom. He was just a story, a cautionary tale. The man who tried to buy a legacy and erase a history, only to lose everything in a single spectacular self-inflicted blast. He was worthless. And in the blinding glare of his public ruin, he knew with chilling certainty that it was the only true thing anyone would ever say about him again. The hours following Ava's departure were a blur of exquisite humiliation. Julian remained rooted to the spot at the altar, a statue in a Tom Ford tomb long after the last guest had fled. The flashes from the paparazzi outside the chapel doors were relentless, their ghostly light painting the stained glass windows in strobing infernal patterns. He felt like an animal in a zoo, his public caging complete. His security head. Gavriel finally materialized, his face a grim mask of failure. "Sir, we need to move you." Julian didn't respond. He was listening to the sound of his future being dismantled, one whispered phone call and one frantic news alert at a time. The hashtag #WeddingGate was already trending. The ride back to Manhattan was silent. Gavriel drove his eyes fixed on the road, the air in the car thick with unspoken recriminations. Julian's phone, which he'd left with his security team, was a vibrating brick of incoming notifications. He scrolled through them with numb fingers. Hundreds of missed calls. His lawyer, his PR chief, every single member of the Croft Innovations board, and a single brutal text from his brother. "I'm sorry. It was the right thing to do." Julian hurled the phone against the divider, where it shattered into a spiderweb of black glass. He spent that first night in his penthouse, a glass palace overlooking a city that now scorned him. He prowled its empty, cavernous rooms, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, watching his own immolation on every news channel. There was the footage Ava ethereal and damning in her white dress. Charlotte, her face a perfect mask of aristocratic fury. Victoria Van Doren, delivering her lethal proclamation. And him. Julian Croft, the self-made billionaire, looking small, trapped, and utterly defeated. The commentators were sharks, in a feeding frenzy, tearing apart his reputation with glee, framing the story as a modern-day Icarus tale. He wasn't just a liar. He was a cliché. The business collapse was even swifter and more brutal than the social one. When the stock market opened at 9:30 a.m. on Monday, Croft Innovations' CRFT was in free fall. Julian watched the ticker on a financial news network, the red arrow pointing down like a spear aimed at his heart. Billions of his net worth evaporated in minutes. The emergency board meeting was convened via video call that afternoon. It was a bloodbath. The members, men and women who had praised his genius and cashed his checks for years, now looked at him with cold contempt. Led by a hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, a man Julian had once considered a friend, they invoked a morals clause in his contract. "Your actions constitute gross misconduct and have caused irreparable reputational damage to this company." Thorne said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "We are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman of the board." "You can't do this," Julian snarled, the scotch making him reckless. "I am this company." "No, Julian," Thorne replied coolly. "You're a liability. The board vote is unanimous. Your access will be terminated by the end of the day." The screen went blank. He was locked out of his own kingdom. The Van Doren lawsuit landed the next day. It was a work of legal savagery, a 50-page document detailing charges of fraud, intentional misrepresentation, and emotional distress. Their lawyers, a famously ruthless firm, leaked select damaging excerpts to the press, ensuring the narrative of Julian as a manipulative monster was cemented in the public consciousness. The cruelest cut came a week later. He saw his brother Damien on a morning news show. Looking tired but resolute, Damien gave a quiet, heartfelt interview, publicly apologizing to Ava Reynolds for his complicity and his silence. He explained how Julian's ambition had curdled into a corrosive greed that he could no longer stand by and witness. He announced he was leaving his position at Croft Innovations and taking a job with a legal aid society. Julian watched, shaking with a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. His own family had publicly chosen her side. The betrayal was absolute. The following months were a descent into a grey, featureless hell. Julian became a prisoner in his own home, the sprawling penthouse a gilded cage. He fired his household staff, unable to bear their pitying glances. He let the floor-to-ceiling windows gather a film of city grime, keeping the blinds drawn, living in a perpetual twilight. Paranoia became his only companion. He was convinced his phone was bugged, that every car parked across the street was a surveillance van. He spent his days obsessively scrolling through articles about his downfall, rereading the vicious comments, torturing himself with the evidence of his global disgrace. He saw photos of Charlotte in St. Bart's, laughing on a yacht with a handsome German duke, her trauma apparently assuaged by Mediterranean sun and new money. She had successfully rebranded herself as the resilient survivor. Meanwhile, a different story was taking shape across the East River. After the wedding, Ava had been hounded by the press. For 2 weeks, she was painted as the vengeful woman scorned, a narrative she found almost as suffocating as Julian's initial erasure. But she and Ben hunkered down, ignored the noise, and focused on the work. Using the notarized partnership agreement Damien had confessed to, and bolstered by Damien's public apology, Ava had leverage. She didn't want to sue for a piece of the dying Croft Innovations. She wanted a clean break. She wanted to build something new. She took a meeting with Athena Ventures, a female-led VC firm known for backing overlooked female founders. She didn't lead with the scandal. She led with the code. For 2 hours, she walked them through a new, more elegant and efficient logistics algorithm she had been developing in secret for the past year. It made the core technology of Croft Innovations look antiquated. The firm's lead partner, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, listened intently. At the end of the presentation, she leaned back. "The technology is brilliant, Ms. Reynolds, but the world knows you as the woman who crashed a wedding. Why should we invest in that?" Ava met her sis without flinching. "You shouldn't invest in the woman who crashed a wedding. You should invest in the woman who built the company that wedding was supposed to celebrate. The woman who was so ruthlessly effective that Julian Croft had to pay millions to silence her. I didn't crash a wedding to get revenge. I did it to get my name back. Now I want to put that name on a company that values integrity as much as innovation." She got the funding that afternoon. She called her new company Axis for the way it would become the new center of the industry. Her first hire was Ben. Her second was a young engineer she'd mentored years ago. She built her office in a bright, airy loft in Brooklyn, fostering a collaborative culture that was the antithesis of Julian's top-down, fear-driven regime. The Wired article titled "The Phoenix of Silicon Alley" was her public coronation. It told the full story, painting her not as a victim or a villain, but as a brilliant technologist who had reclaimed her power. The accompanying photo showed her at a whiteboard marker in hand, surrounded by her diverse, smiling team. She looked purposeful. She looked free. Reading that article was the final nail in the coffin of Julian's ego. He realized with a soul-crushing certainty that her rebellion had never truly been about him. Destroying him was just a necessary step in her process of creation. He was a footnote in her comeback story. This realization sparked a desperate final impulse. He needed to see her. He needed some form of closure, of absolution, of anything other than this suffocating indifference. He showered for the first time in days, put on a clean suit that hung loosely on his frame, and took a car to Brooklyn. When he walked into the bright, buzzing offices of Axis, it felt like stepping onto another planet. People were talking, laughing, collaborating. Ben Carter spotted him instantly, his friendly face hardening as he moved to intercept. "You have no right to be here, Julian." But Ava had already looked up from the whiteboard she was working at. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a weary resignation. She held up a hand to stop Ben, then nodded toward a small, glass-walled conference room. The silence inside was deafening. He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time since that day in the chapel. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a calm, centered confidence. She was no longer the ghost of Orchard Street. She was the CEO of Axis. "I came to apologize," he began the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. "For everything. For stealing your work, for breaking your heart, for trying to erase you. I was so lost, so desperate to prove I was worthy that I became a monster." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry." Ava listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she asked a simple, devastating question. "Are you apologizing because of what you did, Julian, or because you got caught?" The question hung in the air, a perfect, polished mirror reflecting his own pathetic soul. He wanted to scream, to protest, to insist his remorse was genuine. He tried to summon the righteous indignation, but it wouldn't come. He saw the truth laid bare in her unwavering gaze. He was sorry because he had lost. He was sorry because his name was worthless. His penthouse was a prison, and his life was empty. His apology was the final selfish act of a drowning man begging for a raft. He had no answer for her. His silence was his confession. A slow, sad nod was her only reply. "I thought so," she said softly. "I wasted a year of my life hating you. Then I wasted a few months being afraid of you. I'm done wasting my time on you, Julian. That day at the wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the end of my story with you. It was the only way I could get back to my own life, to my own work." She stood, signaling the end of the meeting and the end of them for good. "The thing is, I don't hate you anymore," she said, her voice clear and final, devoid of passion or malice. "To hate you would mean I still care. You're just a chapter I've finished, reading a bad investment I've finally written off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." She turned and walked out of the conference room, without a backward glance, immediately rejoining her team at the whiteboard, her back to him. Julian remained in the glass box, a specimen on display. He watched her point at the board, her team nodding eagerly, the energy of creation palpable even through the soundproof glass. He was an outsider looking in at a world he had helped create, but could never be a part of. He had been utterly and completely erased, not by a legal document or a public scandal, but by something far more permanent, her complete and total indifference. He walked out of the vibrant office and back into the grey afternoon. He was Julian Croft, the man who had everything and nothing, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life, forever chained to the memory of a woman who had finally gloriously learned how to build a world without him. And so Julian Croft's gilded empire, built on a foundation of stolen ideas and profound betrayal, crumbled to dust. This wasn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It was a brutal lesson in consequences. It shows that the truth, no matter how deeply you bury it, has a way of clawing itself back into the light. Ava Reynolds didn't just crash a wedding. She reclaimed her life and her legacy, proving that true power isn't about the money you have, but the integrity you keep. Julian wanted to buy respectability, but he learned the hard way that it can only be earned. What would you have done in Ava's shoes? Would you have taken the money and stayed silent, or would you have risked it all for the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of dramatic justice and spectacular downfalls. Please give this video a like, share it with a friend, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true-life dramas. What if the person you trusted most, the one holding your hand while you brought new life into the world, uttered words that shattered your reality? For one woman, in the raw, agonizing moments of childbirth, her husband's casual dismissal, "She's just being emotional," became a chilling premonition. He thought he was calming a hysterical wife. He had no idea he was speaking to a titan of industry in the making. The very next day, while he was picking out a "World's Best Dad" mug, her face was on the cover of Forbes. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a single, callous comment ignited a revolution in one woman's life and exposed the staggering secrets hidden within her marriage. The birthing suite at St. Jude's Medical Center was a study in beige indifference. The walls, the color of weak tea, seemed to absorb the frantic energy that pulsed within them. For Isabella Martinez, the world had shrunk to the rhythmic peaks and valleys of her contractions, each one a wave threatening to pull her under. Her husband, David Chen, sat perched on the edge of a visitor's chair, his tailored suit a stark contrast to her sweat-dampened hospital gown. He looked less like a supportive partner and more like a man waiting for a delayed flight. Can you just breathe with me?" Isabella gasped, her knuckles white as she gripped the bed rail. "Like we practiced?" David looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance crossing his handsome features. "I am, honey. I'm right here." He took a perfunctory deep breath, the sound barely audible over the beeping of the fetal heart monitor. "No, you're not," she ground out, another contraction seizing her. "You're checking your emails. I can see the blue light on your face." "It's an important deal, Izzy," he said, his voice laced with a familiar note of condescension. "The market in Singapore is opening and I need to be on top of it. You know how crucial this quarter is for my promotion." Isabella squeezed her eyes shut, a tear of frustration and pain leaking from the corner. It wasn't just the physical agony of labor, it was the gnawing loneliness of it. For months, she had felt like a supporting character in the grand narrative of David's career. His late nights at the office, his networking dinners, his constant talk of targets and projections. It had all created a chasm between them. She had hoped the birth of their first child would bridge that gap, would be the one thing that was unequivocally theirs. "David, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I need you. Right now. Just for a little while." He sighed, a long-suffering sound that made her stomach clench tighter than any contraction. He pocketed his phone and moved to her bedside, taking her hand in his. His touch was cool and distant. "Okay, I'm here. See, just try to relax. Just try to. The doctor said it could still be hours." But Isabella couldn't relax. The pain was a living thing clawing at her from the inside. With each surge, a primal scream built in her throat. She tried to hold it back, remembering the calm, serene births she had seen in online videos. But this was not serene. This was brutal. "It hurts so much," she whimpered, her body trembling. "I don't think I can do this." David patted her hand awkwardly. "You're being a little dramatic. Don't you think women have been doing this for centuries? My mother had 3 kids, and she never made this much of a fuss." The words, meant to be placating, landed like a slap. "Dramatic," she whispered, her voice dangerously low. "Well, yeah," he said, oblivious to the storm gathering in her eyes. "You're getting all worked up. It's not good for the baby. The nurse said to stay calm." The nurse, a kind older woman named Brenda, chose that moment to enter the room. She took in the scene. Isabella's tear-streaked face, David's stiff posture, with a practiced eye. "How are we doing, sweetie?" Brenda asked, her voice a warm balm. "He thinks I'm being dramatic," Isabella said, her voice trembling with a mixture of pain and fury. Brenda shot David a look that could curdle milk. "Well, then he's never seen a woman in transition. You're doing amazing, Isabella. Your body is working hard." She then turned to David. "And you, sir, your only job right now is to be her rock. Tell her she's a warrior. Tell her she's the strongest person you know, because right now she is." David had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I'm sorry, Izzy. I don't know what to do." "Just be here," she pleaded. "Just be present." For a while he was. He held her hand, wiped her brow, and murmured encouraging words that sounded like they were lifted from a script. But as the hours dragged on, his attention began to wander again. His phone would reappear in his hand, his gaze drifting to the television in the corner of the room, which was tuned to a 24-hour news channel. The final stage of labor was a blur of excruciating pain and disorienting commands. "Push, Isabella, push," the doctor urged. She bore down with all her might, a guttural cry tearing from her lips. She was exhausted, emotionally flayed, and felt utterly alone. In a moment of reprieve, she looked at David, searching for a lifeline in his eyes. He was looking at her, but his expression was not one of awe or concern. It was pity. And then he said it, the words that would echo in her mind for years to come. He leaned over to the doctor, a conspiratorial whisper that she was clearly meant to overhear. "She's always been a bit emotional, tends to overreact." The doctor, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Dr. Anya Sharma, didn't even grace him with a response. Her focus was entirely on Isabella. But Isabella heard. The words cut through the haze of pain, sharp and precise. It wasn't just a dismissal of her current agony. It was a judgment on her entire being. Every time she had cried over a sad movie, every time she had been passionate in an argument, every time she had expressed a deep-seated fear or a soaring hope, it was all being filed away under the label of emotional. In that moment, something inside her shifted. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the crucible of her pain. She would show him. She would show them all. With a final ferocious push, she brought her daughter into the world. The baby's cry filled the room, a raw, powerful sound that silenced everything else. They laid the tiny, wriggling creature on her chest, and Isabella was consumed by a love so fierce it stole her breath. She looked at her daughter, so small and yet so full of life, and made a silent promise. She would never let anyone make her feel small again. David, now all smiles, and relieved cheer, leaned in to kiss her. "You did it, Izzy. She's beautiful." Isabella turned her head away. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. He recoiled, his smile faltering. What's wrong?" She looked at him, then her eyes clear and steady. "You'll see," she said. And in that moment, he had no idea just how true those words would be. He was looking at his wife, the mother of his child, but he was also looking at a stranger, a woman he had fundamentally misunderstood, a woman who was about to turn his world upside down. The day after their daughter, whom Isabella unilaterally named Hope, was born, the hospital room was a revolving door of well-wishers. David's parents, the Chens, arrived with an ostentatious balloon bouquet and a barrage of unsolicited advice. Isabella's own mother, a quiet, gentle woman, brought a hand-knitted blanket and a thermos of chicken soup. David was in his element, the proud new father, accepting congratulations and regaling everyone with a sanitized, heroic version of the birth story. He conveniently left out his emotional comment and his preoccupation with the Singaporean market. Isabella played her part, smiling weakly and accepting the coups and compliments directed at Hope. But inside, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of her own life. The cold resolve that had taken root in the delivery room had not thawed. If anything, it had solidified into a quiet determination. That afternoon, while Hope slept in her bassinet and David was down in the cafeteria charming the nurses, Isabella's best friend, Chloe, arrived. Chloe was a whirlwind of energy and brightly colored scarves, a successful graphic designer who had been Isabella's confidant since college. "Oh, honey, you look like you just pushed a human out of your body," Chloe said, enveloping her in a gentle hug. "But a beautiful, glowing warrior goddess version of that." Isabella managed a genuine smile for the first time that day. "Thanks, Chloe. I needed that." "I brought you the essentials," Chloe said, unpacking a bag filled with gourmet chocolates, a trashy celebrity magazine, and a bottle of expensive champagne. "The champagne is for when you get home, obviously, or for now, I don't judge." Isabella laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "Maybe later. I'm still a bit wobbly." "So," Chloe said, settling into the visitor's chair and lowering her voice, "how's Captain Corporate? Did he manage to put his phone down for more than 5 minutes?" Isabella's smile faded. "Barely. He told the doctor I was being too emotional while I was in the middle of a contraction." Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in fury. "He did not. Oh, I will end him. I will use my design skills to create a PowerPoint presentation detailing his every flaw and email it to his entire company." "Save your energy," Isabella said, a strange new confidence in her voice. "I have a better idea." Before Chloe could ask what she meant, David bustled back into the room, holding a copy of a financial newspaper. "You will not believe this, Izzy," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "The Harrison deal went through. My numbers are going to be through the roof this quarter. That promotion is in the bag." He brandished the paper like a trophy. "That's great, honey," Isabella said, her tone flat. He didn't notice. His attention was already on the television, which was tuned to a business news channel. A breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. "Tech world stunned by Aura, mysterious new AI platform that secures $500 million in Series A funding." David scoffed. Another one of these overnight success stories. Probably just some kid in a garage who got lucky. The news anchor continued, her voice filled with professional excitement. "The founder of Aura, who has remained anonymous until now, has been revealed, and it's a name no one in Silicon Valley saw coming." On the screen, a photograph appeared. It was a professionally shot headshot, one Isabella had taken a few months ago for a project she had told David was for a freelance design portfolio. She looked powerful, her expression serene but determined. Beneath the photo in bold letters was her name, Isabella Martinez. The camera then panned to a magazine cover. It was the latest issue of Forbes, and there she was again in the same power pose under the headline, "The Unseen Force, Isabella Martinez, the woman behind the revolutionary AI Aura and her $1.5 billion valuation." The room fell silent. The only sound was the gentle sucking noise Hope was making in her sleep. Chloe's jaw was on the floor. She slowly turned to Isabella, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning admiration. You are Aura." Isabella simply nodded, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. David stood frozen, the newspaper slipping from his grasp, and fluttering to the floor. He stared at the television screen, then at his wife, then back at the screen. His face, which had been so full of self-congratulation, glee just moments before, was now a mask of utter bewilderment. What is this?" he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the TV. "This has to be a mistake. A joke." "It's not a joke, David," Isabella said, her voice as calm and clear as a bell. "It's my company." "Your company?" He squeaked his voice an octave higher than usual. "What company? You design websites for dentists." "I did," she corrected him gently, "in my spare time, for the past 2 years while you were working late and going on business trips. I was building Aura." She went on to explain, her voice steady and sure, how she had identified a gap in the market for a more intuitive, human-centric AI for creative professionals. How she had taught herself to code late at night after David had fallen asleep. How she had secretly assembled a small, brilliant team of female engineers who, like her, had been underestimated and overlooked by the tech industry. How she had bootstrapped the company with her freelance earnings, and then using a male pseudonym, Alex Chen, to avoid the inherent bias of the venture capital world, had pitched her idea to investors. "Alex Chen." David repeated, his voice hollow. "You used my name, a version of it," she said. "I thought it was fitting." The news anchor was now interviewing a tech analyst who was gushing about Aura's potential. "This is a game changer," the analyst said. "The platform is light years ahead of anything else on the market, and the fact that it was created by a woman of color no less, who has been completely outside the Silicon Valley echo chamber. It's a story for the ages. Isabella Martinez isn't just the future of AI. She's the future of business." David sank into the visitor's chair, his face pale. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her for the first time in years. He wasn't seeing the emotional woman he had so casually dismissed. He was seeing a stranger, a brilliant, powerful, and utterly self-possessed stranger who had built a billion-dollar company from their spare bedroom. And he, the man who was so proud of his potential promotion, suddenly felt very, very small. The chasm between them had not been bridged by the birth of their daughter. It had been revealed for what it was, a vast, gaping canyon, and he was on the wrong side of it. The revelation of Isabella's secret life as a tech mogul sent shockwaves not just through the business world, but through the sterile beige hospital room that had become the unlikely epicenter of their domestic drama. For the next few hours, Isabella's phone, which she had kept on silent, buzzed incessantly. Emails, texts, and social media notifications poured in a digital tsunami of congratulations, interview requests, and investment offers. Chloe, now fully recovered from her shock, had gleefully taken on the role of temporary gatekeeper fielding calls and marveling at the names that flashed across the screen. "Mark Cuban's assistant just called," she whispered to Isabella at one point, her eyes like saucers. "And I think I just hung up on Sheryl Sandberg." David, in stark contrast, was a study in stunned silence. He had retreated to a corner of the room, his face a pallid mask of confusion and what looked suspiciously like fear. He kept glancing at Isabella, then at the sleeping baby, as if trying to reconcile the two wildly different versions of the woman he thought he knew. The doting new mother in the hospital gown, and the ruthless CEO on the cover of Forbes. How could they be the same person? His own world, which had seemed so solid and impressive just that morning, now felt flimsy and insignificant. His hard-won deal, his imminent promotion. They were like children's toys compared to the Eha she had built in secret. That evening, after the last of the visitors had departed and a fragile quiet had settled over the room, the tension between them was a palpable thing. Isabella was breastfeeding Hope, her expression serene, as she gazed at her daughter. David, unable to bear the silence any longer, finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me, Izzy?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you hide all of this from me?" Isabella looked up, her eyes unreadable. "Would you have believed me?" she asked softly. "Or would you have told me I was being emotional, that I was overreacting?" The words, a direct echo of his own callous dismissal, hit their mark. David flinched as if struck. "That's not fair," he mumbled. "Isn't it?" She countered, her voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel. "For the past 5 years, David, my dreams have been a footnote to yours. My ambitions were something to be managed, to be fitted in around your schedule. When I wanted to take a course in advanced coding, you said we couldn't afford it, that my freelance work was just a hobby. The week after, you bought a new set of golf clubs for your networking with clients." She adjusted the baby in her arms, her movements fluid and confident. "I learned very quickly that if I wanted to achieve anything, I had to do it on my own. So I did." David ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time that day. I had no idea you felt that way. I always supported you." "You supported the version of me that you were comfortable with," she said, "the one who made your favorite dinner, who listened to you complain about your boss, who organized our social life. You didn't want a partner, David. You wanted a support system, an unpaid intern for your life." The raw, unvarnished truth of her words hung in the air between them. David opened his mouth to protest, to defend himself, but no words came. Because deep down he knew she was right. He had taken her for granted, had relegated her to the background of his own ambition. He was about to apologize, to beg for a chance to understand, when a nurse knocked on the door and entered with a small official-looking envelope. "A courier just delivered this for you, Mr. Chen," she said, handing it to him. David took it, a puzzled frown on his face. It wasn't from his office. The return address was a prestigious law firm in the city center. With trembling fingers he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a formal notice, a letter of termination. "What is it?" Isabella asked, noticing the color drain from his face. He read the letter aloud, his voice a strangled croak. "Dear Mr. Chen, this letter is to inform you that your employment with Sterling and Finch is terminated effective immediately. This decision is based on a gross violation of the company's code of conduct, specifically Clause 12.b regarding insider trading and corporate espionage." He looked up at Isabella, his eyes wide with panic. "Insider trading, corporate espionage. This is insane. It's a mistake. Is it?" "David." Isabella's voice was quiet, but it cut through his panic like a surgeon's scalpel. "Of course it is," he insisted, his voice rising in desperation. "I would never, I don't even know how. Let me jog your memory," she said, her gaze unwavering. "A few months ago, you came home very excited about a new client, a tech startup called Innovatech. You said they were developing a revolutionary new AI platform." David's face went white. "How? How did you know about that?" "Because Innovatech was my primary competitor," Isabella said calmly. "And I have it on very good authority that you accessed their confidential data room using your senior credentials at Sterling and Finch, and then you sold that information to their biggest rival." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. David stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had been so careful, had used encrypted channels, had covered his tracks meticulously. How could she possibly know? The Harrison deal. She continued, piecing it all together for him. The deal you were so proud of this morning, the one that was supposed to get you your promotion. It was with the company that bought Innovatech's stolen data, the data you provided. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. His big win was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. And somehow his wife, the woman he thought was designing websites for dentists, knew all about it. But how? He whispered, the fight draining out of him. You're not the only one with connections, David. Isabella said, a hint of a sad smile on her lips. Aura isn't just a platform for creatives. It's also one of the most sophisticated data analysis tools in the world. It can find patterns and connections that no human could ever see. It took Aura less than a second to trace the data breach at Innovatech back to an IP address. Your IP address, at your office. She had known. For weeks she had known about his betrayal. She had watched him celebrate his success, knowing it was all a sham. She had let him walk right into the trap he had set for himself. The irony was staggering. He had dismissed her as too emotional, while he was the one engaging in criminal activity, driven by a desperate ego-fueled need to get ahead. He had accused her of being dramatic, while his own life was a carefully constructed house of cards about to come crashing down. He looked at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable opponent, a queen in a high-stakes chess game he didn't even know he was playing, and he had just been checkmated. He sank to his knees, the letter of termination crumpling in his fist. He had not only lost his job and his reputation, he had lost his wife. And he had no one to blame but himself. The woman he had underestimated had not just surpassed him, she had exposed him. The drama in the delivery room was just the opening act. The real story was just beginning. The days that followed were a surreal blur of jarring contrasts. While Isabella's star ascended at a meteoric rate, David's world imploded with brutal efficiency. The news of his termination for corporate espionage, coupled with the bombshell revelation of his wife's identity, became a salacious B story in the business journals. He was a modern-day Icarus, flying too close to a sun he didn't even know existed. His name, once a mark of rising success at Sterling and Finch, was now whispered in tones of pity and scorn. He checked out of the hospital suite with Isabella and Hope, a ghost of the man who had checked in. The drive home was silent, the air in their luxury sedan thick with unspoken accusations and the quiet hum of $1 billion valuation. Their beautiful minimalist home, once a symbol of their shared success, now felt like her territory. The sleek furniture, the curated art, the panoramic city views, it all seemed to belong to her, to the formidable CEO of Aura, not to the emotional wife he had married. Isabella, meanwhile, was navigating the treacherous waters of her newfound fame with a preternatural calm. She set up a temporary command center in their home office, the same room where she had secretly built her empire. Chloe, who had quit her job with a flourish of triumphant emails, was now her de facto chief of staff, managing a relentless schedule of calls with lawyers, investors, and public relations firms. "The New York Times wants a feature," Chloe would announce, sticking her head into the nursery where Isabella was changing Hope's diaper. "And Anderson Cooper's people are online too. They want you for a primetime special." Isabella would simply nod her focus on the tiny human in front of her. "Tell them my daughter's nap schedule is non-negotiable." This juxtaposition was not lost on David. He would watch from the doorway as she seamlessly transitioned from a tender, cooing mother to a sharp, decisive executive negotiating the terms of a multi-million-dollar partnership with a Japanese tech giant, while gently rocking Hope's bassinet with her foot. He saw a strength and a multifaceted brilliance in her that he had been completely blind to. He had seen her only through the narrow lens of his own needs and expectations. His days were a bleak landscape of shame and inactivity. He spent hours aimlessly scrolling through the news on his tablet, each article about Isabella's genius and Aura's disruptive technology, a fresh stab to his wounded pride. His former colleagues, the ones who had clapped him on the back and called him a rainmaker, now crossed the street to avoid him. The networking buddies he had played golf with were suddenly unavailable for a drink. He was a pariah, and the loneliness was crushing. In a desperate attempt to feel useful, he tried to take over the domestic duties. He made coffee, which was too weak. He attempted to cook dinner and nearly set off the smoke alarm. He offered to watch Hope, but his fumbling, uncertain movements only made the baby cry, and Isabella would have to swoop in and expertly soothe her. He was as incompetent at home as he now was in his professional life. One evening, about a week after they had returned from the hospital, David found Isabella in the nursery, softly singing a lullaby to Hope. He stood in the doorway, a silent, pathetic figure. "I'm sorry, Izzy," he said the words, feeling woefully inadequate. "For everything. For what I said in the hospital, for the other thing." Isabella didn't turn around. "Which other thing are you referring to, David?" she asked, her voice soft but pointed. "The insider trading or the years of casual neglect?" He flinched. "Both. All of it. I was a fool. I was so wrapped up in my own ambition I couldn't see you. I didn't see you." "No, you didn't," she agreed, finally turning to face him. Hope was asleep on her shoulder, her tiny face a picture of pure innocence. "You saw what you wanted to see. A pretty, agreeable wife who would make your life comfortable while you pursued your important career." "I can change," he pleaded, taking a tentative step into the room. "Let me show you. I'll support you. I'll be a stay-at-home dad. I'll be your unpaid intern. Whatever you want." A sad smile touched Isabella's lips. "It's not that simple, David. This isn't about you taking on a new role in my life. It's about the fact that the entire foundation of our marriage was a lie. You didn't respect me. And trust, once that's gone, it's almost impossible to get back." Her words were not angry, but they were devastatingly final. He felt a chasm opening up between them, far wider than the one he had perceived before. Just then, Isabella's phone, which she had left on the changing table, began to buzz. Chloe's name flashed on the screen. Isabella sighed and answered it. "What is it, Chloe? I'm putting the baby down." Chloe's voice on the other end was frantic. "You need to see this. Turn on the news. Any channel." Isabella's brow furrowed in concern. She picked up the baby monitor and walked into the living room, David trailing behind her like a lost puppy. She flicked on the large-screen TV. A news anchor was reporting live, a graphic of a man's face displayed prominently next to her. The man was handsome, with a charismatic smile and piercing blue eyes. The name beneath the picture was Liam O'Connell. "Breaking news in the tech world tonight," the anchor said. "Liam O'Connell, the disgraced founder of Innovatech, the company at the center of the recent corporate espionage scandal, has just released a statement. O'Connell, who was once Isabella Martinez's mentor, and according to sources, her former fiancé, is claiming that he is the true architect of the Aura platform. He alleges that Martinez stole his intellectual property after their acrimonious breakup 5 years ago." The camera cut to a pre-recorded video of Liam looking earnest and wronged. "Aura was my brainchild," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Isabella was my protégé. I trusted her, And she betrayed me. She took my work, my dream, and passed it off as her own. I have the proof. I have the original code, and I will fight to get my company back." David stared at the screen, a new wave of shock washing over him. Former fiancé, mentor. This was a part of Isabella's past he knew absolutely nothing about. He turned to look at his wife. Her face, which had been so composed and in control, was now ashen. Her hand, which held the remote, was trembling slightly. The formidable CEO, the unshakable titan of industry, looked for the first time vulnerable. The man on the screen, Liam O'Connell, was not just a rival. He was a ghost from her past, a ghost David never knew existed, and he had just declared war. The battle for Aura was no longer just about business. It was deeply, dangerously personal. And David, the disgraced husband, was caught in the crossfire, a powerless spectator to a drama that had started long before he had ever entered the picture. The accusation from Liam O'Connell landed like a grenade in the already chaotic landscape of Isabella's new life. The media, which had been celebrating her as a feminist icon and a business visionary, now pivoted with dizzying speed. The narrative shifted from a story of female empowerment to a salacious tale of love betrayal and stolen genius. "Tech's new queen, or a cunning thief," blared one headline. "The battle of the exes who really created Aura," screamed another. Liam, a master of public relations, played his part to perfection. He gave tearful interviews, painting himself as the brilliant, trusting mentor, whose heart and life's work had been stolen by a manipulative femme fatale. He produced reams of evidence, early-stage code snippets, concept documents, and emails from 5 years prior that, taken out of context, seemed to support his claim. He was charismatic, believable, and he had a story the media couldn't resist. Aura's investors grew nervous. The company's valuation, which had been soaring, began to wobble. The board of directors, who had been singing Isabella's praises, now called for emergency meetings, their voices laced with concern. The fairy tale was over. Now the witch hunt had begun. Inside the minimalist fortress of their home, the atmosphere grew even more strained. Isabella became a woman possessed. She worked around the clock. Her days a frantic blur of legal consultations, board meetings, and strategy sessions with her PR team. She barely ate, and the soft maternal glow she'd had in the days after Hope's birth was replaced by a hard, brittle exhaustion. David watched her, his feelings a tangled mess of guilt, awe, and a strange, newfound protectiveness. He saw the toll Liam's accusations were taking on her, and for the first time, his concern was not for himself, but for her. He remembered the name Liam O'Connell from snippets of conversation early in their relationship. Isabella had mentioned him once or twice, vaguely referring to him as a former boss from her first job in tech. She had never mentioned they were engaged. The omission now felt like a gaping wound, a testament to the secrets they had both kept. One night, David found her in the Home Office at 3 a.m., surrounded by stacks of legal documents, her face illuminated by the cold light of her laptop screen. Her shoulders were slumped, and for a moment she looked utterly defeated. "You should sleep," he said softly from the doorway. She jumped, startled. "I can't. They're filing an injunction tomorrow. They want to freeze all of Aura's assets." He walked into the room, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he didn't feel like an intruder. He pulled up a chair and sat opposite her. "Talk to me, Izzy," he said. "Tell me about him. Tell me the truth." Isabella stared at him, her eyes searching his for a long moment. Then she let out a long, shuddering breath and began to speak. Liam was my first real boss, she began, her voice low. I was young, just out of college, full of ideas. He was brilliant, charismatic, the golden boy of the local tech scene. He took me under his wing. We started working on a project together, an early concept for an intuitive AI. It was collaborative. My ideas, his coding expertise. She paused, a shadow passing over her face. He was also incredibly charming. He made me feel like I was the center of the universe. We fell in love. We got engaged. I thought he was my future. What happened? David asked gently. The closer we got to a viable product, the more he changed, she said. He started taking credit for my ideas in meetings. He would present my concepts as his own. When I confronted him, he would laugh it off, tell me I was being sensitive. He'd say, "We're a team, baby. What's yours is mine." But it never seemed to work the other way around. The word sensitive hung in the air, a bitter echo of David's own words in the delivery room. He felt a fresh wave of shame. The final straw, Isabella continued, was when he pitched our project to a major VC firm. He put his name on the patent application as the sole inventor. My name was nowhere on it. When I found out, I was devastated. I told him it was over. He didn't take it well. He threatened to ruin me to make sure I never worked in the tech industry again. He said he would paint me as an unstable, emotional woman who couldn't handle the pressure. She looked at David, her eyes blazing with a long-suppressed anger. So I disappeared. I left the tech world. I started my own small freelance business, and I met you. I never wanted to look back. I buried that part of my life because I was ashamed. I let him make me feel small. And Aura? David asked. Aura is all mine, she said with fierce pride. It's built on a completely different framework. The core concept of a human-centric AI might be similar, but the architecture, the code, the entire execution is mine. The snippets he's showing the media, they're from our old project. They're a dead end. They're worthless. But he's banking on the fact that no one will dig deep enough to see that. He's not trying to win in a court of law. He's trying to win in the court of public opinion. He wants to destroy my reputation, just like he promised he would. David listened, horrified and enlightened. He finally understood the depth of her past trauma, the reason for her secrecy. It wasn't about deceiving him. It was about protecting herself. And he, with his own casual dismissiveness, had unwittingly become a part of the pattern of men who had underestimated and belittled her. A new resolve hardened within him. He was not a tech genius. He was not a PR expert. He was a disgraced former executive with a tarnished reputation. But he still had a brain, and he knew the world he came from. The cutthroat, ego-driven world of corporate finance, a world not so different from Liam's. He's a bully, is he? David said, his voice firm. And I know how to deal with bullies. They have weaknesses. They're arrogant. They make mistakes. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. You're fighting him on your turf, technology and the law. You need to fight him on his. Public perception, corporate warfare. For the first time since the news broke, Isabella looked at him not as a failed husband, but as a potential ally. What are you suggesting? I still have a few contacts, David said, a glimmer of his old confidence returning. People who owe me favors. People who hate Liam O'Connell more than you do. He burned a lot of bridges on his way up. Let me make some calls. Let me dig. You focus on the legal battle. Let me handle the back channels. Isabella hesitated for a moment. Could she trust? Asked him. Could she rely on the man who had so recently betrayed her? But as she looked at him, she saw a different man. She saw the man who had been humbled, the man who was finally seeing her for who she was. And she saw a flicker of the sharp, strategic mind that had, however, misguidedly gotten him to the top of his own field. "Okay," she said, giving him a single decisive nod. "Let's see what you can do." It was a fragile truce, a temporary alliance born of desperation. But in the dead of night in the war room of her besieged company, it was a start. David, the disgraced husband, had just been given a chance to redeem himself. And as he picked up his phone, he knew he wasn't just fighting for her company. He was fighting for his marriage, for his family, and for the last tattered remnants of his own honor. The battle for Aura had just gained a new unexpected soldier. While Isabella and her legal team prepared for an all-out war in the courtroom, David launched a covert operation from the confines of their home. He transformed from a moping unemployed husband into a man on a mission. He worked his phone like a weapon, calling in old markers, leveraging long-forgotten connections, and piecing together a mosaic of Liam O'Connell's less-than-stellar history. He discovered a pattern of behavior, a string of former partners and junior employees, mostly women, who had left Liam's companies under mysterious circumstances, many with non-disclosure agreements and quiet settlements. His key informant was a disgruntled former CFO of Innovatech, a man named Marcus Thorne, whom Liam had unceremoniously fired a year prior. Thorne, bitter and eager for revenge, was a treasure trove of information. "Liam's a narcissist," Thorne told David over an encrypted call. "He's brilliant, I'll give him that. But he's a black hole of credit. He sucks it all in, and no light escapes. He leaves a trail of bodies behind him. Check out a woman named Dr. Alana Finch. She was his lead researcher before Isabella. She left the country after working with him. Last I heard, she was teaching at a university in New Zealand." That was the lead David needed. He spent 2 days trying to track her down, finally finding an email address for a Dr. Alana Finch at the University of Auckland. He drafted a careful, respectful email explaining the situation and appealing to her sense of justice. He didn't know if she would reply, but it was a shot in the dark he had to take. Meanwhile, the pressure on Isabella was immense. Liam's injunction was granted temporarily, freezing Aura's operational accounts. The move was a strategic blow designed to cripple the company and sow panic among its employees and investors. The media circus was relentless. Liam was everywhere, the charming, wronged victim, while Isabella was portrayed as the cold, calculating ice queen. The climax arrived during a live, televised town hall event hosted by a major news network. It was billed as a debate, a chance for both sides to present their case to the public. Isabella, against the advice of her lawyers, had agreed to participate. "I'm not going to hide," she had told them. "I'm not going to let him control the narrative." The stage was set. Isabella sat on one side, poised and steely. Liam sat on the other, his expression a carefully calibrated mix of sadness and resolve. The moderator began, and for the first 30 minutes Liam was winning. He spoke eloquently of his vision, of his passion for the project, and of his devastation at being betrayed. He presented his cherry-picked evidence with the flair of a seasoned showman. Isabella's responses were technical, precise, and factual. She spoke of code architecture and development timelines. But in the arena of public opinion, facts were a poor match for a compelling emotional story. The live audience polls showed a clear swing in Liam's favor. David watched from the green room, his heart pounding. He had been feeding information to Isabella's PR team. But Liam was a formidable opponent. Just as he was starting to lose hope, his phone buzzed. It was an email. The sender was Alana Finch. The email was short, but it was explosive. "Mr. Chen," it read, "I will not be silenced any longer. Liam O'Connell is a fraud. He did to me exactly what he is doing to your wife. I am boarding a flight to Los Angeles now. I have a recording, and I have the original time-stamped server logs from our project. He didn't just steal my work. He tried to pass it off as his own to secure his first round of funding. I am sending the recording to you now." Attached was an audio file. David's hands trembled as he downloaded it. He quickly forwarded the email and the file to the lead producer of the town hall, a woman he had managed to connect with earlier, with a simple, urgent message: "You need to see this. A surprise witness is on her way. Play the tape." Back on stage, the moderator was moving in for the kill. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her tone sympathetic but firm, "Mr. O'Connell has presented a compelling case. He has emails, documents. What do you have other than your word?" Isabella opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the moderator held up a hand. "We have just received some breaking information in this case. A new piece of evidence has just been submitted." A confused murmur went through the audience. Liam's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "We have an audio recording," the moderator announced. "Mr. O'Connell, perhaps you can shed some light on it." And then a voice filled the studio. It was Liam's voice, but it was not the calm, measured tone he had been using all evening. It was a voice from 5 years ago, dripping with venom and rage. "You think you can challenge me?" Liam's recorded voice sneered. The audio quality was slightly muffled, but the words were crystal clear. "You're nothing without me, Alana. You're just an emotional, hysterical woman. I will bury you. I will take your work. I'll put my name on it, and I will make sure everyone in this industry knows you're unstable. Who are they going to believe? Me, the golden boy? Or you, the hysterical woman who couldn't take the pressure?" The silence in the studio was absolute. Every eye was on Liam. The color had drained from his face. The charismatic mask had shattered, revealing the ugly, snarling bully underneath. It was the exact same pattern of abuse, the same dismissive, misogynistic language he had used with Alana and that Isabella had described. The moderator's voice was icy. "Mr. O'Connell. That was your voice, was it not? And the woman you were speaking to, that was Dr. Alana Finch, your former lead researcher, was it not?" Liam was speechless. He looked like a cornered animal. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Isabella looked directly at him, her expression not triumphant, but filled with a cold, righteous anger. "This is his pattern," she said, her voice ringing with clarity and power. "He finds talented women, exploits their work, and when they stand up for themselves, he tries to destroy them by calling them emotional or unstable. He didn't just steal from me. He has a history of it. The only difference is, this time he picked the wrong woman." The audience, which had been so sympathetic to Liam just moments before, erupted in a wave of applause. The spell was broken. The truth in all its ugly detail was out. In the green room, David watched, tears welling in his eyes. He had done it. He had given her the ammunition she needed. He had helped her win. On stage, Isabella Martinez was no longer on the defensive. She was in complete command. She had not only saved her company, she had exposed a predator and given a voice to his other victims. She was not just the CEO of Aura. She was a symbol of something far more powerful. She was a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed and betrayed, and had risen from the ashes stronger and more brilliant than ever before. The queen had not been dethroned. She had just solidified her reign. The fallout from the town hall was immediate and spectacular. Liam O'Connell's career imploded overnight. His investors pulled out his board, resigned, and he became a pariah in the industry he had once dominated. Dr. Alana Finch, who arrived mid-scandal to a throng of reporters, became an overnight hero, and her testimony, along with the server logs she provided, sealed Liam's fate. The injunction on Aura's assets was lifted, and the lawsuit was dropped. The story of Liam's downfall and Isabella's triumph became a legend in the tech world, a cautionary tale about the perils of hubris and the power of truth. Aura's valuation skyrocketed, surpassing even the most optimistic projections. Isabella, now free from the cloud of suspicion, was hailed not just as a genius, but as a courageous leader who had faced down a powerful bully and won. She used her newfound platform to launch a foundation dedicated to supporting women in STEM, ensuring that others would not have to face the same barriers she had. But amidst the public victory, a private reckoning was still to come. Isabella and David returned home from the town hall in silence. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a quiet, contemplative exhaustion in its wake. The war was over, but the landscape of their marriage was still a battlefield. They put a sleeping hope to bed, their movements around each other, careful and deliberate. Then they sat opposite each other in the living room, the city lights twinkling below them. "Thank you," Isabella said, her voice soft but sincere. "I couldn't have done it without you. You saved me." David shook his head. "You saved yourself, Izzy. I opened a door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." He looked down at his hands. "I know this doesn't change anything. Not really. What I did, how I treated you, it's still there." "No, it doesn't erase it," she agreed. "But it does show me something. It shows me that you're capable of seeing me, truly seeing me. And it shows me that you're willing to fight for me, not just for yourself." She looked at him, her gaze clear and searching. "The man I married, the one who checked his emails while I was in labor, the one who dismissed my pain. I don't know if I can ever get back to him. I don't think I want to." David's heart sank. "I understand." "But," she continued, a flicker of something new in her eyes, "the man who worked tirelessly to find Alana Finch, the man who used his skills to defend my honor, the man who put his own ego aside to help me, that's a man I could get to know. That's a man I could, potentially, build a new future with." It wasn't a promise of forgiveness. It wasn't a guarantee of reconciliation. But it was a possibility, a fragile, tentative opening. "Our old marriage is over, David," she said, the finality of it hanging in the air. "It was built on a flawed foundation, on secrets and disrespect. If we're going to have any chance, we have to tear it all down and start again. From scratch, with honesty, with respect, and with a clear understanding of who we both are." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. "I am the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I am a mother. I am a woman who will never again allow herself to be made small. Can you love that woman? Can you be a true partner to her?" David stood up and walked to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. He looked at her reflection in the glass, the powerful, brilliant, and complex woman who was his wife, the woman he had almost lost. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion, but steady with a newfound certainty. I can, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you, if you'll let me. Isabella didn't reply immediately. She just continued to stare out at the city lights, a city of infinite possibilities. The future was unwritten. The trust was not yet rebuilt. The healing was far from complete. But for the first time since the cold, sterile moments of the delivery room, there was a glimmer of something that had been absent for far too long. There was hope. A new architecture for their lives was waiting to be designed, and this time they would build it together, brick by honest brick. So what do you think? Was David's betrayal unforgivable, or does his fight for redemption earn him a second chance? The story of Isabella and David is a raw look at what happens when the person you love most fails to see who you truly are. It's a reminder that sometimes our greatest challenges are not in the boardroom, but in our own homes. If this story of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, if it made you question, cheer, or even cry, then please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let us know in the comments below, Team Isabella or Team Second Chance. We can't wait to hear from you.